Today we're using speed paints to paint up a Bretonian knight for the lady. I'm Angela, you're watching Hobby Night, and let's get started. That's right, we're heading back to the old world with a Knight of Bretonia for the lady as voted on by my patrons. I have a massive collection of some older Warhammer models, so I thought it'd be fun to have a series where I talk about and paint up some of those older models. So I put a vote up on my Patreon, and the Bretonian Knight won, and I'm very hyped for this because I'm going to be going with my classic Hobby Knight color scheme, which goes black and red. We're going to be playing around with the Army Painter Speedpaints some more because my first attempt with them on the Escher didn't exactly go how I thought it would, and I want to give them another shot. I want to try a different primer this time, treat the paint in a little bit of a different technique, and go ahead and use the medium that the product came with to aid the flow and just see what that does with this new paint. I'm very excited for this. I think we've got some good things in store, so let's go ahead and look at some of the testing I did and then get to painting our model. I have been doing some testing. Before I actually work on my knight, I wanted to go ahead and test some of the colors because I had a little bit of a mixed experience with my speed paints previously. So I took this handy dandy space marine that I have here who's primed up using Wraithbone, which I don't believe is the color I'll actually be using on my knight, but because it is a contrast specific primer, I figured it'd be a good test. And I actually also pulled out this, I blanked on the name of these. Stormcast Eternal. There we go. I also have the Stormcast Eternal that I also primed up in Greyseer, which is what I will be using on my knight, and I also did some testing on here. So what I have discovered through my tests is that, one, I know what colors for the red and black that I want to use is going to be because we are going with the Hobby Knight color scheme, so I wanted a rich red and a deep black. So obviously we're going with the Grim Black for the speed paints because that is the only black that they have. However, I'm going to layer it a couple times because I found that when I layered it, I got some really nice highlights and shadows going on, and it gave me the depth that I wanted. And the same thing happened when I was doing the red. You can actually see, I'm going to switch over to the marine here. This foot here is just with the speed paints.
Under the light, please.
Sorry. This foot here is just with a single coating of blood red speed paint on it. The one above it is with dragon red as the base coat with blood red over top. And then on the holster here, I used the Master Series paint Phoenix red, and then again, did blood red over top. I really like what happened when I came over here to the hand and did a second layer of the speed paint over top of itself. And I got a really nice rich color tone. So I think I'm gonna go that direction. I'm gonna go pure speed paint with this, not do a base color underneath, but I'm going to layer it a few times because it does seem like it needs that to really get the saturation levels that I am looking for now that it's working a little bit more how I expected on actual primer that works with it.
So one thing I wanted to ask, because I have a feeling the comments will, what is going on with this foot?
Yes, so I did want to bring up this foot here because this foot is the most promising to me and really makes me think that these speed paints are going to work spectacularly over colored metallics. This is using the Army Painter Gem Red, which comes in their metallic color set with the blood red over top of it. It creates a stunning candy apple color tone that I absolutely adore, and I have plans to use it on something in the future. I don't know quite what yet. It's not what I'm going to be doing on my knight because it doesn't quite fit the vibe that I'm wanting to go for. I want the sort of classic Bretonian knight color scheme, and while there are going to be some metallics added in, I don't really want to do specifically colored metallics. I want all of my colors to be a little bit more flat, a little bit more like they're painted on, rather than it being like a metallic tone that is that color. So we're going to ignore this for now, but it is very, very cool, and I do have some plans for some videos with this color tone. So let's go ahead and start working on the knight now that we've finished our testing. And since speed paints are supposed to behave very similarly to them, I'm going to go ahead and hope that this is going to give me better results. I also decided after the spray prime was done to actually go on and hand prime the model additionally as well, just to make sure I get really thorough coverage and I don't have any open or exposed areas of plastic where the paint might not stick well enough. With the primer down, let's go ahead and get started on this model. Now, I want to use the speed paints as I would any other paint and do this in combination with a bunch of different styles. But to start, we're going to stick with a pure speed paint, going with Grim Black and applying this to comparison on the horse. That's a little cape thing that he's got on him. I really love how this looks, but it's a bit paler with only one coat than I was really wanting. So I decide after it's thoroughly dry to go ahead and apply 2 other coatings of this black color tone. Now, something that I found very interesting about the way that this black paint works over, say, Black Templar from the contrast line is you can actually layer it a few times without it going super flat or losing some of its detail, which is not something I can say for the contrast paint line. I'm curious how many of the other paints from this line do that, or if it's just some of these darker colors, but so far I'm very happy with the way that this color is coming out. Now, I also want to use this Grim Black color tone on anything that I want to be metallic. I find anytime I'm painting metallics that having a black undercoat really helps make those a little bit more vibrant and helps the paint go down a little bit faster, and the contrast paint line tends to work well for this, so I'm hoping the speed paint line does too, and in fact it will. We're going to put this on all of the armor, anything that's going to be metal on the horse, as well as the knight. With the black undercoat down, let's go ahead and start on those metallics. And I'm going to start with the Army Painter's Plate Mail Metal. We are going to be using mostly Army Painter paints today. Now, for this plate mail color, I'm going to be using it on any of the chainmail, any of the fasteners that are on both of their weapons, as well as some of the details later. With that done, we're going to move on to our other metallic color tone, which is Greedy Gold. I love how bright and vivid this particular gold tone is, and I'm going to be using it on the plate mail, as well as the predominant design on the dragon helm, as well as the helm for the horse. I just absolutely love the way that this works out. It really makes me want to paint some custodians, so we might see that in the future as well. Now that the gold is done, I do want to come back to the plate mail color tone one more time. I left a couple of embellishments unpainted, and I'm going to take care of that now, applying that steel color tone back to them, just to add a little bit of variety and really pop some details, specifically on the arm of the knight where all those little rivets are. I think this is going to really help that stand out a bit more and be a really subtle but cool design. It's that time of the video where I interrupt to tell you about my Patreon and to let you know that we just added a Discord server which all tiers get access to. So if you're wanting a way to chat with me, share with me your projects, or just tell me what board games you're playing, definitely make sure to check the link below and check out my Patreon. I'm about to go into my first major cleanup stage because I just finished the metallics on my 2 models, and frankly, I think they are looking pretty freaking fantastic. I really am also very happy to see, and you can see on the pants of the knight, as well as the first black cloth that I've done on the horse, that the speed paints appear to be behaving more like I expected them to, which is fantastic to see. I do think there was something going on with the primer in my previous paint job, because the paints are actually sitting on top of the primer more. They're not really getting absorbed as much as they were before and spreading in that weird way. So that's really good to see. I'm going to be curious to see what happens when I use the red, because I've done a little bit of testing off screen, and I do think that the speed paints need 2 layers to really get the saturation level I'm looking for. But overall, I'm very happy to see this update, see that they're working a little bit better. So let's go ahead and get to my cleanup stage and get back to painting. I am very pleased with how this model is turning out so far, but we need to continue on and add some more color, specifically a lot of reds and browns next. So let's start with that red, specifically blood red from the speed paint line. I really love this color tone. There were a few instances while I was working with it on the comparison where it dried a smidge splotchier than I would say some of the contrast paints do, but honestly, I think that was more just my technique and still being not used to working with this particular medium as much. But regardless, I love the way this is turning out. We're going to be using it on, like I said, the comparison, but also some details on the knight. Now, with the red out of the way, I want to go ahead and tackle the horse. I debated doing this in either a brown or a gray, and ultimately a dark brown won out. The gray I decided might be either a little bit too blue and conflict with the red tones I had been using, as well as I just really wanted to try out dark wood because I really like the wildwood color in contrast, and I wanted to see how this compared to it. And frankly, I kind of like it a little bit better. I do think it you can layer it a bit more, just like you can the black, which I really, really liked. I did only do one layer on the horse. I actually thought I got a really nice saturated brown out of it, but I do think you could layer it and go even darker and get some really nice ranges out of these colors. Now, speaking of brown tones, there's one more that we need to take care of, and that is hardened leather on all of the leather straps that connect the horse's armor to him, as well as on the scabbard of the knight himself. I also really dig this color tone. This one I do genuinely like more than I do snakebite leather from the contrast line. It's not as shiny, and it definitely does not dry as splotchy, because of all of the contrast paints out there that I use regularly, snakebite leather is the one I struggle with the most because I just don't get consistent color out of it. But with the hardened leather from the Speedpaints by Army Painter, I didn't have that problem. I got an even, beautiful coating each time I used it, and I loved how it turned out. So I'm very, very pleased with this color tone. Next, we're gonna work on a couple of key details that I think are gonna really make the model pop. First, we're gonna pull out Slaughter Red and use this on the scabbard of both the dagger as well as the sword at the knight's side. This is probably the choice that I made that I regret the most. I wish I had gone with something either a little bit darker or a little bit lighter, because I think it actually blended in too much with the blood red, which I guess is a criticism of those two color tones. They are a little bit too similar to one another. That being said, I still think this model is turning out great, and we have some more details to take care of. So let's move on to Pallid Bone, which is still one of my favorite tones from this line, because I really am digging the paler color tones from the Speedpaint line. Pallid Bone I'm going to end up using on the horse's teeth, as well as a shade on all of the gold metallics that we painted. I did a little bit of testing on my model that you saw earlier at the beginning of the video, where I actually did a little test of this, and I loved the way that the Pallid Bone antiqued the gold just slightly. It enhanced the richness, it shot down that shininess just a smidge, but it's still a very vibrant color tone, and I love that. In similar way, we're going to go ahead and move on to the steel and go ahead and wash that using Gravelord Gray, just like we did the Pallid Bone on the gold. This works very similarly, it mutes that color tone, and I'm really digging how this works. I think it's a very good substitute for Basilicanum Gray if you like that color a lot as well. It's a little bit cheaper. The last thing that we need to do is go ahead and take care of those weird grass tufts that the horse is standing on that some of these older models come with, and we're gonna go ahead and put Malignant green on that. It's one of the new colors from Speedpaint, obviously. It is, I would say, comparable to Plaguebearer Flesh, but it's a little bit lighter, like a little bit more pastel almost, and I really, really like it. Again, the pale tones are working wonders for me. We're on to the part that has probably had me the most nervous, but also the most excited to take care of, and that is all of the heraldry on my knight. I debated what I wanted to do for the shields, but ultimately decided to use 3 color tones to basically help them pop and stand out against what I had done on the comparison, as well as the knight's armor. Now, the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go back to Grim Black, and on the shield itself that the knight is carrying, we're gonna divide it in half using this, and then on the shields on the horse, we're going to quarter them. Then we're going to move on to the red, doing the exact same thing. And while you're doing this, if you're ever doing heraldry, don't worry if you're not perfectly straight or even on your first pass. If you're adding an additional color in, you're probably gonna end up doing some cleanup anyways, and you can tidy up those lines and shape up those shields the way that you want them to look when you're doing that cleanup stage, which is exactly what I do, using a bit of Greyseer in between these 2 colors before I move on to my final color, which is going to be Holy White. I really debated what I wanted to do for this final color to really help them pop, and ultimately decided a pale color tone would work best. So we're gonna apply this to his helm as well as to those shields on the horse. I adore how this ends up turning out, but we still need to take care of the base, so let's get to that. I am so pleased with how this has turned out. Like, I've got the base left to do, as you can probably see. However, the horse, the knight, he is all done. He looks fantastic, and I am happy to say that the speed paints have actually worked how I expected them to. They do still work a little bit different from contrast paint, but that's really not a big deal. I'm loving the colors I'm getting out of them. Plus, I'm just, in general, really pleased with this Bretonian. It has been so fun to paint, but that's not why we're here. We need to talk about the base. I'm going to keep this pretty simple. I'm going to do a Sterling Mud base on the ground, just so we can get some nice dirt down, and then I'm going to be using a variety of tufts, both from the Gamer's Grass ones, which are these ones here, as well as a couple of Army Painter tufts in there as well, just because I really like how those two match color-wise. Now, these big, tall ones are going to be very important because I really don't like these odd grass tuft things that they put onto these fantasy miniatures.
Stalagmite grass.
Yeah, they are so weird. They look like stalagmites. Like, they don't look quite like grass. So I'm hoping that these really tall grasses that I have from Gamer's Grass will do well to hide that. And when I picked out what color I want to do on these grass tufts that are actually painted on here, I chose the light malignant green color tone because I thought it actually popped best with these and would sort of blend and fade into the background behind them because it actually complemented them most. So we're gonna go ahead and get the dirt down, put a bunch of tufts on, and then take a look at the final model. It's my night, and I am so freaking pleased with this thing, you have no idea. I like I said in the beginning of the video, I have been dying to paint some Bretonians. I love the old school Warhammer fantasy models, and honestly, while I was painting this, I had an absolute blast, even when I was slightly panicked having to do the heraldry because I was really worried it wasn't gonna come out right. But I'm very pleased to say that it came out swimmingly. Just look at him, he's so glorious. I have a lot of positive things to say about the speed paint this time around in comparison to what I did with my Escher. And I think it all comes down to the primer that I ended up using. The Corax White just did some weird things. I don't know if it was the temperature that we did it at, if it's just that can of primer sucked and maybe had been really old, because it was one of my older cans, so maybe the aerosol in it just had borked or whatever, or it could just be that Corax White sucks, which I've heard in the past, and I probably won't be using it again. However, the Greyseer primer worked exceptionally well with the speed paints, and I'm super glad to see that because they behaved more like what I was hoping they would, and still differently enough from contrast paint that I'm pleased to see that there is that difference. I don't want these paints to be identical. I don't want their colors to even be identical. And while I made a lot of comparisons in this video to some colors that maybe the speed paints are similar to, I only did that so that you know, hey, if I don't want to spend the $5 or $6 that the contrast paint bottle costs, I can pick up what is, I assume, probably going to be a cheaper bottle of the Army Painter pots of speed paint. I just really like these paints overall. There are still some that I don't know if I would say choose over some of my contrast colors, but there are some like the Hardened Leather that I definitely will be choosing over some of my contrast colors. Plus, during part of my experimentation for the night, I actually was trying the colors over some colored metallics, and I really like the way those are. You saw the red sample in the test area, and I have some plans for that, for some other projects that involve it, and showing off more of what the speed paints can do over top the Army Painter colored metallics, because I really think that's where these paints are going to shine. Overall, I really had a blast painting this. I can't wait to paint up more of them and doing some other color schemes. I really stuck with the black and red and white because it's a color scheme that I know, it's a color scheme that I'm comfortable with. And since I'm still experimenting with the speed paints, I wanted to do something that I was familiar with. I think going into a test project, when you're trying out new tools or colors, you should always do something maybe you're more familiar with so you can make comparisons and then really grade how you think these paints are working for you and what you're doing with them. That is definitely my advice for trying out any type of new medium that you might be working with. That being said, I wanted to give a huge thank you to my patrons, not only for allowing content like this to continue to happen, but also for voting on the night to be what I painted this month. I am really excited for this old school series. I hope you guys are looking forward to the next vote, which will be coming soon on Patreon. And if you want to join in on that vote and have a say on what you see me paint on the channel, then feel free to join at the Hobby Night tier, which gets you the voting rights. Anyways, I have been Angela. I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode, and I will see you next week for some more tutorials. Bye!